Rowan stands trembling in Cade's bedroom, the door locked behind him. The cowboy's voice cuts through the darkness. "Say you're mine while I'm inside you." 6 months of his life hang in the balance. One word could save everything, or destroy it. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The desert wind carried dust and secrets across the Arizona territory, but nothing traveled faster than rumors about Cade Maddox. They said he stood tall enough to block out the sun, that his hands could break a man's will as easily as a wild horse, that women who crossed his path either ran or surrendered completely. Most ran. The smart ones, anyway. Rowan Fletcher wasn't smart. Or maybe he was too smart for his own good, standing in the middle of Cade's ranch with a deed in one hand and desperation in the other. 22 years old, rail-thin from months on the trail, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw set against the fear churning in his gut. He needed this job. Needed it more than air. The ranch house door opened slow, deliberate. Cade Maddox filled the frame like he was carved from the mountains themselves, 6'5" of sun-darkened muscle and controlled power. His eyes, pale blue and piercing, swept over Rowan with the kind of assessment that stripped away every lie a man might tell himself. Those eyes lingered, calculated, decided. "You're late." Cade's voice rolled out like distant thunder, low enough to vibrate in Rowan's chest. "And you're nothing like what I asked for." Rowan's throat went dry. The advertisement had been clear. Ranch hand needed. Must be strong, obedient, willing to follow orders without question. The pay was good, suspiciously good, but Rowan had learned not to question fortune when it finally showed its face. "I can work harder than any man you've had," Rowan said, hating how his voice almost broke. "I don't complain, don't ask questions, don't cause trouble." Cade stepped down from the porch, each bootfall deliberate. He moved closer until Rowan had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, until he could feel the heat radiating off the bigger man's body, until the scent of leather and sage and something undefined made his head swim. "That right?" Cade's hand came up, and Rowan flinched before he could stop himself. But the touch, when it came, was almost gentle. Calloused fingers gripped Rowan's chin, turning his face this way and that, studying him like a horse at auction. "You ever been broken in, boy?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Rowan didn't want to examine. His heart hammered against his ribs. "I've worked ranches before." "That's not what I asked." Cade's thumb brushed across Rowan's lower lip, and the younger man's breath caught audibly. "I ask a question. I expect an honest answer. We're going to try this again. Have you ever been broken in?" "No, sir." The words came out barely above a whisper. Something dangerous flickered in Cade's eyes, something that made Rowan's knees weak and his pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Or maybe everything to do with it. "Good. I prefer to do my own training." He released Rowan's chin but didn't step back. "Here's how this works. You sign that deed over to me as collateral against your wages, which means for the next 6 months, you belong to me. You eat when I say, sleep when I say, work when I say, and when I give you an order, you follow it. Immediately. Completely. No hesitation. You understand?" Rowan's mouth had gone desert dry. He'd signed the deed because he had nothing else, because the bank was going to take his father's land anyway, because he'd been desperate enough to gamble everything on a stranger's ranch in the middle of nowhere. But standing here now, with Cade's overwhelming presence pressing against him like a physical weight, he understood this was about more than ranch work. "I understand," he managed. "Do you?" Cade's hand settled on the back of Rowan's neck, fingers tangling in the sweat-damp hair there. Not pulling, just holding, possessive and firm. "Because once you step through that door, once you accept my terms, there's no changing your mind, no running, no backing out when things get difficult. You'll do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without question. Can you handle that?" Every instinct screamed at Rowan to run, to grab that deed and disappear into the desert before whatever this was could begin. But the rational part of his brain, the part that had watched his father's dreams crumble to dust, that had felt the gnawing emptiness of having nothing and no one, kept his feet planted. "Yes, sir." The smile that curved Cade's mouth was slow and predatory. We'll see about that. His hand tightened just slightly on Rowan's neck, not painful but undeniably controlling. First rule, you call me sir or Cade, nothing else. Second rule, when I ask you something, you answer immediately. Third rule, he leaned down until his breath ghosted across Rowan's ear, sending involuntary shivers down the younger man's spine. When I tell you to say you're mine, you say it like you mean it, because for the next 6 months, body and soul, that's exactly what you are. Rowan's heart was trying to beat its way out of his chest. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was nothing like any ranch work he'd ever done. But his father's land, his last connection to everything he'd lost, that deed was in Cade's hand now, and the only way to get it back was through. I understand, sir. Good boy. The praise shouldn't have sent warmth flooding through him, but it did. Now, let me show you exactly what I expect from you. Cade finally stepped back, and Rowan could breathe again, though the air felt thinner somehow, charged with electricity. The bigger man gestured toward the barn, and Rowan followed on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of every step, every breath, every moment. The barn was immaculate, organized with military precision. Tools hung in perfect rows, stalls mucked and fresh, everything in its place. Cade stopped in the center of the space and turned to face him. Strip off your shirt. Rowan froze. Sir? I need to see what I'm working with. Shirt. Off. Now. Fingers trembling slightly, Rowan unbuttoned his worn shirt and let it fall. He was too thin, he knew that. Ribs visible beneath pale skin that rarely saw sun. Working the Fletcher farm had been more about surviving than thriving, and it showed in every hollow of his frame. Cade circled him slowly, assessing. You're going to need to build up your strength. The work here is hard, demands everything you have. He stopped behind Rowan, close enough that the younger man could feel the heat of him. But we'll get you there. I'll make sure of it. A hand settled on Rowan's bare shoulder, broad and warm and heavy with unspoken promise. This body belongs to me now. I'm gonna push it, test it, break it down, and build it back up stronger than you ever imagined. And you're going to let me, aren't you? Yes, sir. Rowan's voice came out rougher than intended. Say it. Say what, sir? Cade's hand slid from his shoulder to the back of his neck again. That same possessive hold. Say you're mine. The words caught in Rowan's throat. This was a line. He knew it was a line. And once he crossed it, everything would change. But the alternative was losing the land, losing everything, disappearing into the desert with nothing and no one. I'm yours, sir. Again, like you mean it. Rowan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle into his bones. I'm yours. That's better. Cade's voice dropped even lower, intimate and commanding. You're going to say that a lot over the next 6 months. In this barn, in the house, when you're so exhausted you can barely stand, when you think you can't take any more, when every muscle in your body is screaming. You're going to look at me and say those words, and you're going to mean them every single time. Understand? Yes, sir. Now. Cade released him and stepped back. Let's see how well you follow orders. What followed was hours of grueling work, mucking stalls, hauling water, mending fence, every task designed to test Rowan's limits. And through it all, Cade watched with those pale, penetrating eyes, offering no help, no encouragement, just observation, studying every movement, every moment of weakness, every flash of defiance that Rowan tried desperately to suppress. By the time the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire, Rowan could barely stand. His hands were blistered, his back screaming, sweat soaking through what was left of his clothes. He wanted to collapse, wanted to cry, wanted to demand this wasn't what he'd signed up for. But Cade stood in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the dying light, and all Rowan could think about was those 3 words. I'm yours. Come here. Rowan walked forward on trembling legs, stopping just in front of the bigger man. Cade reached out, and this time, Rowan didn't flinch. Those calloused fingers traced the line of his jaw, gentle despite everything that had come before. You did well today, Cade said quietly. Better than I expected for someone so green. The praise hit harder than it should have, warming something deep in Rowan's chest. He'd been starving for approval, he realized, for someone to see him as something other than a failure. "Thank you, sir. But we're not done." Cade's hand moved to cup the back of Rowan's head, fingers tangling in his hair. "Not nearly done. Come inside. You need to eat, need to rest. Tomorrow we start building you into exactly what I need." He turned and walked toward the house, and Rowan followed without question, because that was the agreement. That was the deal. And despite every warning bell ringing in his head, despite knowing this was dangerous territory, he wanted to see where this path led. Inside, the house was as meticulous as the barn. Clean lines, sparse furniture, everything functional and deliberate. Cade pointed to a chair at the table. "Sit." Rowan sat, watching as the bigger man moved around the kitchen with surprising grace. Within minutes, a plate of food appeared in front of him, simple but substantial. Meat, potatoes, vegetables. Real food, more than he'd seen in months. Eat. He ate, suddenly ravenous, barely tasting it in his hunger. Cade watched from across the table, those eyes never leaving him, studying every movement like he was memorizing the sight. "When you're done," Cade said quietly, "you'll clean up, take a shower, and go to bed. Your room is the first door on the left. Mine is the second door. The bathroom is between them." Rowan nodded, his mouth full. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Rowan's eyes snapped up, meeting that pale, penetrating gaze. His throat worked as he swallowed. "Better." Cade leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying him. "You're going to learn a lot of small rules like that. Eye contact when I speak to you. Immediate responses when I ask a question. Proper posture. The way you hold yourself matters, Rowan. It shows respect, shows you're paying attention, shows you understand your place here." "Yes, sir." Rowan forced himself to maintain eye contact, even though every instinct wanted to look away from that intense scrutiny. "You're uncomfortable," Cade observed. "Why?" The question caught Rowan off guard. "I'm not used to being watched so closely." "Get used to it. For the next 6 months, I'm going to be watching everything you do. How you work, how you move, how you respond to stress and exhaustion, how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." A small smile curved his mouth. "I see more than you think, boy. I see the way your hands shake when I get close, the way your breathing changes when I touch you, the way you lean into it even when you're trying to pull away." Heat flooded Rowan's face. He hadn't realized he was so transparent. "Don't be ashamed of it," Cade said, his voice gentling slightly. "Your body knows what it wants, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. That's natural. That's honest. And honesty is the foundation of everything we're building here." Rowan swallowed hard. "What exactly are we building, sir?" "Trust, structure, a relationship where both of us know exactly what's expected." Cade leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You came here desperate and alone, carrying burdens that were crushing you. I'm offering you a way to set those burdens down, but it comes at a cost. You have to trust me enough to take them from you. You have to obey, even when you don't understand why. You have to surrender control and believe I won't abuse what you're giving me." "And what do you get out of it?" Rowan asked, then immediately wondered if he'd overstepped. But Cade just smiled. "Honest question deserves an honest answer. What I get is the satisfaction of taking something raw and wild and helping it become what it was always meant to be. I get to see you transform from this scared, half-starved boy into a man who knows his own strength. I get someone who trusts me completely, who follows my lead, who fits into my life in a way no one else ever has." He paused. "And I get companionship. This ranch is a lonely place. Having someone here who understands the dynamic, who accepts it, who thrives under it, that's valuable beyond measure." The admission of loneliness surprised Rowan. He'd assumed a man like Cade could have anyone he wanted, could choose from a line of willing partners, but maybe the very thing that made him attractive, that commanding presence, that demanding nature, also made him difficult to be with. "I understand, sir. Do you? Because I don't think you fully grasp what I'm offering yet." Cade's eyes were intense, burning with something Rowan couldn't quite name. Most people spend their whole lives trying to be in control, trying to manage everything, fix everything, carry everything on their own shoulders. It's exhausting, soul-crushing. Eventually, they break under the weight. He reached across the table, his large hand covering Rowan's smaller one. But there's another way. You can choose to let someone else carry that weight. Someone stronger, someone capable, someone who wants that responsibility. You can let go of control and find peace in structure, in obedience, in knowing that someone else is making the decisions and keeping you safe. Rowan stared at their hands, at the way Cade's completely engulfed his own. That sounds too good to be true. It's not easy, Cade admitted. Surrender is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. It goes against every instinct that tells you to protect yourself, to stay in control, to never show weakness. But once you learn how, once you truly let go, you'll wonder how you ever lived any other way. The words painted a picture that was both terrifying and seductive. To stop fighting, stop struggling, stop pretending to be strong enough to handle everything alone, to have someone else take the lead, make the choices, shoulder the burden. It sounded like heaven and hell wrapped together. What if I can't do it? Rowan whispered. What if I try and fail? Then we'll work through it together. Cade squeezed his hand gently. This isn't a test you pass or fail in one day. It's a process. You'll have moments where you excel and moments where you struggle. My job is to push you through the struggles and celebrate the successes. Your job is to keep trying, keep trusting, keep showing up even when it's hard. Rowan felt something shift in his chest, a wall beginning to crack. Why me? You could have anyone. Why take a chance on someone as broken as me? Cade's expression softened. Because broken things are the most beautiful when they're put back together. Because you have something in you, some core of steel, that refuses to quit, even when quitting would be easier. Because when I looked at you standing in my yard, desperate and scared but still defiant, I saw potential. I saw someone worth investing in. He released Rowan's hand and stood. Now finish your food, then shower and get some rest. Tomorrow starts early. Rowan ate the rest of his meal in silence, his mind spinning with everything Cade had said. The water was still running in the bathroom when he finally made his way down the hall, clean clothes clutched in trembling hands. The shower was small but functional, the water pressure strong. Rowan stood under the spray longer than necessary, trying to process the day, trying to understand what he'd gotten himself into. Every muscle ached from the labor, but beneath the physical exhaustion was something else. A strange sort of anticipation, a hunger he didn't quite understand. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, he found a set of clean clothes folded on the bathroom counter. Not his old worn things, but new fabric, still crisp from the store. A silent message, I'm taking care of you. Rowan dressed slowly, running his fingers over the soft cotton, marveling at the small gesture. When was the last time anyone had thought to provide for him without being asked? He made his way to his room, expecting Cade to be elsewhere, but the bigger man was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall like he'd been there the whole time. The clothes fit? Cade asked. Yes, sir. Thank you. Good. Cade pushed off the wall and moved closer. Rowan's back hit his bedroom door, and suddenly Cade was right there. One hand braced against the wood beside his head, caging him in. Before you sleep, I want to make sure we're clear on something. Rowan could barely breathe with Cade this close, could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. What's that, sir? Tomorrow night, you'll be in my bed, not for sleep, not for rest, but to begin your real training. Tonight, I'm giving you time to prepare yourself mentally, to decide if you're truly ready. But once tomorrow comes, there's no more hesitation, no more uncertainty. You commit fully or you walk away. Understood? Rowan's heart was trying to beat its way out of his chest. Yes, sir. Say it. Tell me you understand what's going to happen. Tomorrow night, I'll come to your bed, and we'll begin my training. The words felt heavy on his tongue, weighted with promise and threat in equal measure. And are you going to be ready? Was he? Could anyone be ready for something like this? But Rowan thought of his father's land, of the empty years stretching behind and ahead, of the bone-deep loneliness that had driven him here. And he thought of Cade's words about surrender, about letting someone else carry the weight, about finding peace in structure. I'll be ready, sir. Cade's smile was slow and predatory. We'll see. His hand came up to cup Rowan's face, thumb brushing across his lower lip. "Sleep well, boy. You're going to need your strength." Then he was gone, disappearing into his own room, leaving Rowan trembling in the hallway, his whole body alive with anticipation and fear. "One more thing," Cade said quietly. "You'll clean up, take a shower, and go to bed. Your room is the first door on the left. Mine is the second door. The bathroom is between them." Rowan nodded, his mouth full. "One more thing." Cade leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tonight you sleep alone. Tomorrow night, we'll see if you've earned that privilege. But make no mistake, boy, by the end of this week, you'll be in my bed. And when I tell you to say you're mine, while I'm making you understand exactly what that means, you're going to say it without hesitation. Because that's what you agreed to. That's what you are now." The fork slipped from Rowan's fingers, clattering against the plate. His heart was racing again, his face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Do you have a problem with that?" Cade's voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching for any sign of refusal. Rowan swallowed hard. This was it, the real question, the line he couldn't uncross. He thought of the deed, of his father's land, of the desperate emptiness that had driven him here. And he thought of Cade's hands, of that commanding voice, of the way his body had responded to every touch, every word, every moment of this impossible day. "No, sir," he whispered. "No problem." Cade smiled, slow and satisfied. "Good boy. Now finish your food and get some rest. Tomorrow, we start breaking you in properly." Rowan ate mechanically, his mind spinning. He'd come here for a job, for a chance to save his father's land. But somewhere between the desert and this table, between defiance and surrender, he'd agreed to something else entirely. He'd agreed to belong to Cade Maddox. And God help him, part of him wanted to see exactly what that meant. The shower water ran cold, but Rowan barely noticed. His body ached in ways he hadn't experienced in years, every muscle screaming protest at the day's labor. But beneath the physical exhaustion thrummed something else. Something that made his hands shake as he dried off, made his pulse race as he pulled on the clean clothes Cade had left folded on his bed. His room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the darkening desert, and a door that didn't lock from the inside. He'd checked, twice. Rowan lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. Somewhere down the hall, Cade was moving around, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The shower ran. Stopped. A door closed. Then silence. Rowan closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying every moment, every touch, every word. "Tomorrow night," Cade had said. "By the end of the week, say you're mine." His body responded to the memory of that voice, of those hands, of the overwhelming presence that had dominated every moment since he'd arrived. This wasn't what he'd expected, wasn't what he'd prepared for. But backing out now meant losing everything. And the terrifying part, the part that kept him awake long into the night, was the realization that he didn't want to back out. He wanted to see what happened next. Wanted to know what it meant to surrender completely. Wanted to hear himself say those words again, and mean them. "I'm yours." Outside, the desert wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. And in the darkness, Rowan Fletcher made his choice. Whatever came next, he would face it. He would survive it. And maybe, just maybe, he would find something in this dangerous surrender that he'd been searching for his entire life. The last thing he remembered before sleep finally claimed him was the sound of his own voice, barely a whisper in the empty room. "I'm yours." But sleep didn't last. Sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, Rowan woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall, heavy, deliberate, stopping outside his door. His heart hammered as he stared at the thin line of shadow beneath the door, watching for movement, wondering if Cade would come in, wondering what he'd do if he did. The footsteps moved on. A door closed. Silence returned. Rowan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His body felt strange, wound tight with anticipation and something else, something darker and more compelling. He'd spent his whole life making his own choices, fighting his own battles, standing on his own feet, and in the span of a single day, he'd agreed to give all of that up. For what? For land that might already be lost? Or for something else entirely, something he was afraid to name? He rolled onto his side, staring at the wall between his room and Cade's. Somewhere beyond that thin barrier, the man who now owned him was sleeping. Or maybe he was awake too, thinking about tomorrow, about the week ahead, about all the ways he planned to break down Rowan's resistance. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in his belly, made his breath come faster, made him ache with want he'd spent years denying. Rowan had always been different. Growing up on a failing farm, he'd never had time for the things other young men pursued. No courting, no fumbling encounters in barn lofts, no stolen moments that might have taught him what his body craved. He'd buried those urges deep, focused on survival, on keeping his father's dreams alive, even as they crumbled to dust. But Cade had seen through him in minutes, had recognized the hunger, the need, the desperate ache for someone to take control, to make the decisions, to be the strength Rowan had pretended to have for so long. Tomorrow night, Cade had said. By the end of the week. Rowan's hand trembled as he pressed it against his chest, feeling his racing heart. He'd agreed to this, wanted this. But want and readiness were different things, and he had no idea if he could survive what was coming. When sleep finally came again, it brought dreams. Dreams of rough hands and commanding voices, of surrender so complete it felt like drowning and flying at once, of hearing himself say those 3 words over and over until they became the only truth he knew. Morning came too soon, harsh sunlight stabbing through the thin curtain. Rowan groaned and rolled out of bed, every muscle protesting yesterday's labor. He dressed quickly, determined not to be late again, and stumbled into the kitchen to find Cade already there. Coffee made, breakfast on the table. "Sit," Cade said without looking up from the pan where bacon sizzled. Rowan sat, accepting the plate that was placed in front of him. Real eggs, thick slices of bacon, bread toasted golden, more food than he'd seen in months, and his stomach growled appreciation even as his mind spun with questions he didn't dare ask. Cade sat across from him, those pale eyes watching every bite Rowan took. "You didn't sleep well." It wasn't a question, but Rowan answered anyway. "No, sir." "Thinking about tonight?" Heat flooded Rowan's face. "Yes, sir." "Good." Cade's mouth curved in that predatory smile. "I want you thinking about it. Want you wondering. Want you working yourself up until you can barely stand it, until the anticipation is almost worse than the act itself." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "That's part of the training, boy. Learning to live with desire. Learning that I control when you get what you need, not you." Rowan's fork clattered against his plate. His hands were shaking again, and he clenched them in his lap, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "Eat," Cade commanded. "You're going to need your strength. Today's going to be harder than yesterday." He wasn't lying. The morning's work was brutal, even worse than the day before. Cade had him hauling stones from the creek bed to repair a section of wall, each boulder heavy enough to make Rowan's back scream. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat soaked through his clothes within the first hour. Cade worked alongside him, his powerful frame making the labor look effortless. But every so often, he'd stop to watch Rowan struggle, to observe the strain in his muscles, the determination in his face, the refusal to quit, even when his body begged for mercy. "Rest," Cade said finally, when Rowan was swaying on his feet. He tossed him a canteen. "Drink. 5 minutes." Rowan collapsed in the shade, gulping water, his chest heaving. Cade sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and the proximity made Rowan's skin burn despite the shade. "You're stronger than you look," Cade observed. "Most men would have given up by now." "I don't give up," Rowan said, his voice rough with exhaustion and pride. "No, you don't." Cade's hand settled on the back of his neck. That now familiar, possessive grip. "That's what I like about you. You're stubborn, determined. You push through, even when every instinct screams at you to quit." His thumb stroked the sensitive skin there, sending shivers down Rowan's spine. "But tonight, I'm going to teach you a different kind of strength. The strength to let go, to stop fighting, to trust someone else to take care of you." Rowan turned his head to look at Cade, finding those pale eyes already fixed on him with an intensity that stole his breath. "What if I can't?" "You can." You will. Because you want to. Even if you're scared to admit it. Cade's voice dropped lower, more intimate. I've seen men like you before, Rowan. Men who spend their whole lives being strong for everyone else, never letting themselves be vulnerable, never asking for what they need. And it breaks them eventually. Turns them bitter and hard and alone. His hand tightened slightly. I'm not going to let that happen to you. Why? The question burst out before Rowan could stop it. Why do you care? I'm just some desperate kid who showed up begging for work. Cade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching Rowan's face. Because I see something in you, he said finally. Something rare. Most people, they hide who they really are, spend their whole lives pretending. But you're honest, even when it costs you. You came here knowing what I'd demand, knowing what it would take, and you agreed anyway. That kind of courage, that kind of self-awareness, it's worth investing in. The words hit Rowan harder than any physical blow. No one had ever called him courageous before. No one had ever looked at him like he was worth something beyond his labor, beyond his ability to suffer in silence. Come on, Cade said, standing and offering his hand. Back to work. And tonight, we'll see just how courageous you really are. The afternoon was a blur of exhaustion and anticipation. Every task Cade assigned seemed designed to push Rowan to his absolute limit, to strip away every defense, every pretense of control. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Rowan was running on sheer willpower, his body screaming for rest, his mind fixated on what came next. Dinner was quiet, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Rowan could barely taste the food, too aware of Cade's eyes on him, of the weight of unspoken promises hanging in the air. Go shower, Cade said when they finished. Take your time, get clean, then come to my room. Rowan nodded, not trusting his voice. He stood on shaking legs and made his way to the bathroom, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The shower ran hot, steam filling the small space, and he stood under the spray for longer than necessary, trying to calm his racing heart, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. But how did you prepare for something like this? How did you ready yourself to surrender everything, to place yourself completely in someone else's hands, to trust them with parts of yourself you'd never shown anyone? The water turned lukewarm, then cold, and still Rowan stood there, frozen with indecision. He could leave, could grab his things and run into the night, forget the land, forget the debt, forget everything. Cade might come after him, or he might just let him go, chalk it up to another coward who couldn't handle what he'd agreed to. But that thought, the image of disappointment in those pale eyes, hurt worse than anything else. Worse than losing the land. Worse than the fear of what came next. Rowan shut off the water and dried himself methodically, pulling on clean clothes with trembling hands. Stared at his reflection in the fogged mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. 24 hours ago, he'd been half-starved and desperate, clinging to the last shreds of a life that was already gone. Now he was clean, fed, and on the verge of something that would change him forever. The walk down the hall felt like a death march and a salvation at once. Each step brought him closer to Cade's door, closer to the moment of truth, closer to finding out who he really was beneath all the fear and pride. He knocked, heard that deep voice command him to enter, turned the knob with a hand that shook so badly he could barely grip it. Cade stood by the window, silhouetted against the dying light, and when he turned to face Rowan, his expression was unreadable. Close the door. Lock it. Rowan obeyed, the click of the lock sealing his fate. Come here. His feet carried him forward until he stood before Cade, close enough to feel the heat radiating off the bigger man's body, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in those pale eyes, close enough to lose himself completely. Last chance, Cade said quietly. You can still walk away. I won't chase you, won't hold you to the agreement. You can take your chances on your own. Keep whatever's left of your pride. He paused, letting the words sink in. But if you stay, if you go through that door with me, you have to commit completely. No half measures, no holding back. You give me everything, and in return, I'll give you exactly what you need. Rowan's breath came in short gasps, his whole body trembling with the weight of the decision. Everything in him screamed to run, to protect himself, to keep the last shreds of control he had left. But beneath the fear was something stronger. A bone-deep certainty that this was where he was meant to be, that Cade was offering him something he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. "I'm staying," Rowan whispered. "I'm yours." The smile that curved Cade's mouth was triumphant and tender at once. "Then let's begin." Dawn came too early and too bright. Rowan woke to the sound of his door opening, his body jerking upright before his mind fully processed the intrusion. Cade stood in the doorway, already dressed, coffee cup in hand, looking like he'd been awake for hours. "Sunrise was 20 minutes ago," he said, his voice that same low rumble that did things to Rowan's insides. "You're late. Get dressed and meet me in the barn. 5 minutes." The door closed before Rowan could respond. He scrambled out of bed, his muscles screaming protest at every movement. Yesterday's work had left him stiff and aching, but there was no time to ease into the day. 4 minutes later, he was stumbling into the barn, still buttoning his shirt. Cade stood in the center of the space, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're 30 seconds late." "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't have a clock and—" "Did I ask for an excuse?" Rowan's mouth snapped shut. "No, sir. When I say 5 minutes, I mean 5 minutes. Not 5.5. Not 5:30. 5. If you can't follow a simple instruction like that, how am I supposed to trust you with anything more complicated?" Cade moved closer, and Rowan felt his breath catch. "Maybe you need a reminder of our agreement." Before Rowan could respond, Cade's hand was on his chin again, that firm, possessive grip that made his knees weak. "Tell me, who do you belong to?" "You, sir." The words came easier this time, less hesitation. "And what does that mean?" Rowan swallowed hard, his pulse racing. "It means I follow your orders, without question, without hesitation." "Exactly." Cade's thumb brushed across his lower lip again, and Rowan's breath hitched. "So, when I tell you 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes. When I tell you to do something, you do it. And when I tell you to say you're mine—" He paused, waiting. "I say I'm yours," Rowan whispered. "Good boy." The praise sent warmth flooding through him again, and he hated how much he wanted to hear it. "Now, today we're breaking horses. 3 new ones came in yesterday, wild as the desert, and they need to learn who's in charge, just like you." The comparison wasn't lost on Rowan. He followed Cade to the corral, where 3 magnificent horses paced restlessly, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. One was a massive black stallion, all muscle and fire, fighting against the rope that held him. The other 2 were smaller, a gray mare and a chestnut gelding, but no less wild. "Watch," Cade said simply. Then he was in the corral, moving with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The stallion reared, hooves flashing, but Cade didn't flinch. He just stood there, calm and immovable, until the horse settled. Then he moved closer, one hand extended, voice low and steady, words Rowan couldn't quite hear but felt in his bones. The stallion fought, bucked, tried to intimidate with size and noise and fury. But Cade never wavered, never showed fear, never backed down. He just kept moving forward, kept that steady pressure, until finally, impossibly, the stallion's head dropped, submitted. Cade's hand settled on the horse's neck, stroking gently, and Rowan watched the transformation, from wild to calm in the space of heartbeats, all because one man refused to be dominated. When Cade climbed out of the corral, he wasn't even breathing hard. "Your turn." Rowan's eyes widened. "Sir?" "The gray mare. She's smaller, less aggressive, but she's never been ridden. I want to see how you handle her." Every instinct screamed that this was insane. He'd worked with horses before, but never breaking them, never facing down something wild and unpredictable. But Cade's eyes were on him, assessing, testing, and backing down wasn't an option. Rowan climbed into the corral, his heart hammering. The mare watched him with wary eyes, muscles tense and ready to bolt. He moved slowly, hands out, trying to remember everything he'd just seen Cade do. Stay calm, show no fear. Steady pressure. The mare bolted immediately, racing to the far side of the corral. Rowan followed, slow and steady, never rushing, never giving up. Again and again, the horse evaded him, but he kept coming, kept that gentle persistence that refused to be denied. "Don't chase her. Cade's voice came from the fence. Let her come to you. Show her you're not a threat, but you're not backing down either. Rowan stopped moving, planted his feet, and just waited. The mare circled, head high, watching. Minutes passed. His legs ached, his shoulders burned, but he didn't move. Finally, cautiously, the mare took a step closer. Then another, her nose stretched out, sniffing, testing. Rowan held his breath as her muzzle brushed his palm. Good, Cade said quietly. Now stroke her neck. Slow. Let her know she made the right choice. Rowan's hand trembled as he touched the mare's neck, feeling the warmth of her, the power barely contained beneath silk's soft fur. She didn't bolt, just stood there, accepting his touch, her eyes still wary but no longer panicked. That's enough for today, Cade said. Come on out. Rowan climbed out of the corral on shaking legs, adrenaline making him lightheaded. He'd done it. Not perfectly, but he'd done it. Cade was waiting, and before Rowan could process what was happening, the bigger man's hand was on the back of his neck, pulling him close. You did well. Better than I expected. His voice dropped lower, intimate. You're learning how to be patient, how to persist, how to make something wild trust you. Rowan couldn't breathe. They were too close, Cade's body radiating heat, his scent overwhelming. Thank you, sir. But you're still wild yourself, aren't you? Cade's other hand came up, framing Rowan's face, those pale eyes boring into him. Still fighting, still scared, still not quite ready to admit what you want. I don't. Don't lie to me. The command was sharp, cutting through Rowan's denial. I see it in the way you look at me, the way your body responds, the way you hesitate before you say those words, like you're afraid of what will happen if you mean them. His thumb traced Rowan's jawline, and the younger man shivered. Tonight, my room, and we're going to find out exactly how far you're willing to go. Rowan's mouth went dry. Sir, are you refusing? The question hung between them, weighted with consequences. Rowan thought of the deed, of his father's land, of the agreement he'd made. But more than that, he thought of how his body came alive under Cade's touch, how his pulse raced at that commanding voice, how some deep, hidden part of him wanted to know what surrender really meant. No, sir, I'm not refusing. Then tonight, you'll learn what it really means to be mine. Cade released him and stepped back, leaving Rowan cold and aching. Now, we have work to do. The rest of the day passed in a blur of labor, mucking stalls, hauling supplies, mending fence in the brutal sun. Every task designed to exhaust, to test limits, to break down resistance. And through it all, Cade's words echoed in Rowan's mind. Tonight, my room. By the time the sun began to set, Rowan's body was screaming for rest, but his mind wouldn't settle. He showered, the cold water doing nothing to calm the fire building under his skin, put on clean clothes with trembling hands, stood in his room, staring at the door, knowing what came next. A knock, not on his door, on Cade's, an invitation, a command. Rowan's feet carried him down the hall before his mind could catch up. He knocked, soft and uncertain. Come in. The room was larger than his, dominated by a massive bed that seemed to take up half the space. Cade sat in a chair by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the last of the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. He didn't turn when Rowan entered. Close the door. Rowan obeyed, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Lock it. The click of the lock seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Finally, Cade turned to look at him, and the intensity in those pale eyes made Rowan want to run and stay in equal measure. Come here. Rowan walked forward on unsteady legs, stopping just in front of the chair. Cade set down his glass and leaned back, assessing him with that same calculating gaze he'd used on the horses. Take off your shirt. Fingers trembling, Rowan obeyed. The shirt fell to the floor, leaving him exposed under that penetrating stare. You're still too thin, Cade observed, his voice casual despite the tension crackling in the air. But we'll fix that. Another few weeks of proper food and hard work, you'll start filling out. Start looking like you can handle what I'm going to demand from you. He stood, and suddenly the room felt too small. But tonight isn't about your body. It's about your will. He moved closer until they were nearly touching, until Rowan had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want complete honesty. No excuses, no lies, just truth. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Why are you really here? Cade's hand settled on Rowan's bare shoulder, heavy and warm. And don't tell me it's just about the land. I want the real reason. The one you haven't admitted to yourself yet. Rowan's throat closed up. How could he answer when he didn't know himself? I needed work, needed to save. The truth, Rowan. Cade's other hand came up to cup his face, forcing their eyes to meet. Why are you standing in my bedroom right now, half naked and trembling, when you could have run a dozen times already? The words stuck in Rowan's throat, too dangerous to voice, too true to deny. Because, his voice broke, because I want to know what it feels like. What feels like? To belong to someone. The admission came out barely above a whisper. To stop fighting. To let someone else be in control for once. His eyes burned with unshed tears. I'm so tired of being alone, of being scared, of not being enough. Something shifted in Cade's expression, the hardness softening just slightly. And you think I can give you that? I don't know, Rowan admitted, but I want to find out. Cade was quiet for a long moment, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down Rowan's cheek. I can give you that, he said finally, but you need to understand what you're asking for. This isn't just about work anymore. This isn't just about the land or the deed or any of that. If you give yourself to me, really give yourself, it means trusting me completely, following my lead, letting me push you past every limit you think you have. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. It means some nights you'll fall asleep exhausted and aching, so overwhelmed you can't think straight. It means learning to find peace in surrender. Can you handle that? Rowan's whole body was trembling now, but not from fear, from anticipation, from want so fierce it terrified him. I think so. You think so? Cade's grip tightened slightly. That's not good enough. I need to know you're certain, because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Once I make you mine in every way that matters, you'll never be the same. So I'm asking you one more time. Are you sure this is what you want? Rowan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every rational thought screamed that this was dangerous, that he was in over his head, that he should run while he still could, but beneath the fear was something stronger, a hunger he'd been denying his entire life, a need to finally let go. He opened his eyes and met Cade's gaze squarely. I'm sure. Then say it. Say you're mine, and this time, mean it with everything you have. Rowan took a shaking breath and let the words pour out from the deepest part of himself. I'm yours, completely, body and soul, for as long as you want me. The smile that curved Cade's mouth was triumphant and tender at once. That's my good boy. He leaned down, his breath ghosting across Rowan's ear. Now let me show you what that really means. What followed was hours of Cade pushing every boundary, testing every limit, teaching Rowan exactly what surrender felt like. Not through force, but through steady, relentless pressure that wore down every defense until there was nothing left but raw honesty and overwhelming sensation. Cade's hands mapped every inch of him, learning which touches made him gasp, which made him tremble, which made him forget his own name. That commanding voice guided him through every moment, demanding responses, demanding honesty, demanding complete vulnerability. There came a moment when Rowan felt completely overwhelmed, every nerve ending alive with sensation. His whole world narrowed down to Cade's presence surrounding him, filling his awareness completely. Cade's voice came low and commanding against his ear. Say you're mine while I'm inside you. The words were both literal and metaphorical, Cade's overwhelming presence invading every part of Rowan's being, his consciousness, his heart, his very soul. Rowan couldn't tell where he ended and Cade began, couldn't separate himself from the all-consuming intensity of complete surrender. I'm yours, Rowan gasped, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. I'm yours, I'm yours, I'm yours. Again, say it like you mean it. Say you're mine while I'm inside you, filling every empty space, claiming every part of you. I'm yours, Rowan sobbed, completely undone. God, Cade, I'm yours. All of me. Everything. That's it. That's my boy. Cade's voice was rough with emotion. You feel that? Feel how completely you belong to me now? How deep I am inside you, in every way that matters. Rowan could only nod, lost in the intensity, in the complete possession of body and mind and soul. Tell me what you feel. I can't. Yes, you can. Tell me. And Rowan found himself confessing things he'd never told another soul. The loneliness that had eaten at him for years. The fear that he'd never be enough for anyone. The desperate ache to be seen, to be wanted, to matter to someone. Cade listened to every word, his touches gentling when Rowan's voice broke, his grip tightening when the younger man tried to retreat. You are enough, he murmured against Rowan's temple. More than enough, and you matter. To me. The words broke something in Rowan, and he found himself clinging to Cade like a drowning man, tears streaming down his face as wave after wave of emotion crashed over him. Not just desire, though that was there, fierce and undeniable, but something deeper, connection, acceptance, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being completely known and wanted anyway. Cade held him through it all, solid and unshakable, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. That's it. Let it out. Let it all out. I've got you. And he did. Through every tremor, every gasp, every moment of overwhelming intensity that left Rowan shaking and spent, Cade was there, holding him, praising him, making him feel cherished in a way he'd never experienced. When the storm finally passed, leaving Rowan exhausted and raw, Cade pulled a blanket over them both, his large frame wrapped protectively around the younger man's smaller one. Sleep, he commanded gently. You did well. So well. Rowan wanted to say something, wanted to process what had just happened, but his body had other ideas. Within minutes, he was drifting off, safe in Cade's arms, feeling more at peace than he had in years. The next morning, Rowan woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back, and heat rushed to his face. He was still in Cade's bed, still wrapped in those powerful arms, still wearing the evidence of last night's intensity on his skin. Awake? Cade's voice rumbled behind him. Yes, sir. Good. Cade's hand stroked down his spine, a gesture both possessive and comforting. How do you feel? Rowan took inventory. His body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from being thoroughly worked over. His mind felt clearer than it had in months, like a storm had finally passed, leaving everything washed clean. I feel different. Different how? Lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there, and now it's gone. He turned in Cade's arms to face him. Is that normal? Cade smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less intimidating. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel. You've been fighting yourself for so long, fighting what you needed, that when you finally stopped resisting, it was a relief. His hand came up to cup Rowan's face. But understand, this doesn't make you weak. Surrender isn't weakness. It takes more strength to trust someone completely than it does to fight them. Rowan leaned into the touch, marveling at how natural it felt. What happens now? Now? Cade's thumb brushed across his lips. Now we establish a routine. You'll still work the ranch, still build up your strength, but every night, you'll come to my bed, and we'll continue this. Continue pushing boundaries, continue building trust, continue making you mine in every way that matters. He paused. Unless you want to stop. No. The answer came without hesitation. I don't want to stop. Good. Because I'm not done with you yet. Not by a long shot. Cade's expression turned serious. But we need to establish some ground rules. Some ways for you to communicate when something is too much. They spent the next hour talking, really talking, about boundaries and limits and safe words, about what Rowan needed and what Cade wanted and how to make this arrangement work for both of them. It was practical and intimate at once. And by the end, Rowan felt like he understood what he'd gotten himself into. This wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about trust, about giving up control to someone who would use that power to push him, challenge him, help him become stronger. It was about finding peace in structure, in knowing exactly what was expected, in not having to make every decision alone. And it was about connection, real, deep, honest connection with another human being who saw all of him, flaws and fears and desperate hunger, and wanted him anyway. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Days were spent working the ranch, and Cade was a demanding taskmaster. He pushed Rowan hard, teaching him not just about horses and cattle, but about the land itself, about survival, about strength. Under his guidance, Rowan began to transform. His frame filled out with proper food and hard work, his hands calloused, his confidence grew. But the transformation went deeper than muscle and calluses. Rowan began to notice changes in himself that had nothing to do with physical strength. The constant anxiety that had plagued him for years began to ease. The voice in his head that always told him he wasn't enough, that he'd never measure up, that he was destined to fail. It grew quieter with each passing day. One afternoon, 3 weeks into his stay, Cade brought him back to the corral, where the gray mare waited. The horse had been worked with daily, but never fully broken, her wild spirit still evident in the way she tossed her head and danced away from approach. "She's ready," Cade said. "And so are you." Rowan looked at the mare, then at Cade, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Ready for what?" "To ride her. To finish what you started." Cade's hand settled on his shoulder, grounding. "You've learned patience these past weeks. Learned persistence. Learned how to read what someone needs, even when they're fighting you. Now it's time to put it all together." Rowan climbed into the corral, his heart steady despite the challenge. The mare watched him approach, ears flicking, muscles tense. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, certain, using the same tone Cade used with him in their quiet moments. "Easy, girl. We've done this before. You know me now." The mare didn't bolt this time. She stood her ground, watching, waiting. Rowan moved closer, slow and steady, one hand extended. When his palm touched her neck, she trembled but didn't pull away. "That's it," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." It took an hour of patient work, of gentle persistence, of refusing to rush or force. But finally, impossibly, Rowan was on her back, his weight settled, his hands steady on the reins. The mare tensed, considered bucking, then seemed to make a decision. She walked forward, smooth and controlled, accepting the rider on her back. From the fence, Cade watched with an expression that made Rowan's chest tight. Pride, yes, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like reverence. When Rowan finally dismounted, his legs shaking with adrenaline and triumph, Cade was there to catch him. "You did it. Knew you would." "She let me," Rowan said, breathless. "She chose to trust me, just like you chose to trust me." Cade's thumb brushed across his cheek, a gesture so tender it made Rowan's eyes burn. That's what this has always been about. Not breaking spirits, but building trust. Not forcing submission, but earning it. That night, wrapped in Cade's arms, Rowan found himself talking about things he'd never told anyone, about watching his father drink himself into an early grave, unable to cope with the loss of the farm, about the crushing loneliness of being the last of his line, with no one to share the burden or the memories, about the fear that he'd end up the same way, alone and broken, forgotten by a world that had never cared about him in the first place. Cade listened to every word, his hand stroking steady patterns down Rowan's spine. "You're not alone anymore," he said when Rowan finally fell silent. "And you're not going to end up like your father. You're stronger than he was, braver than he was. You faced your fears instead of drowning them." "Only because you made me," Rowan whispered. "No, I gave you a safe place to do it, but the courage was always yours." Cade tilted his face up, making him meet those pale eyes. "Don't diminish what you've accomplished here. You didn't just survive these weeks. You thrived. You grew. You became everything I saw in you that first day." The kiss was slow and deep, acclaiming that Rowan returned with everything he had. Because Cade was right. He had changed. The frightened, desperate boy who'd arrived with nothing but a worthless deed was gone. In his place was a man who knew his own worth, who understood that surrender wasn't weakness but strength, who had learned to trust not just Cade, but himself. The nights were different. Every evening, after dinner and chores, Rowan would find himself in Cade's room, learning new ways to surrender, new depths of trust. Some nights were intense, leaving him wrung out and shaking. Other nights were gentler, Cade holding him while they talked about everything and nothing. And through it all, those 3 words became a constant refrain. Cade would look at him with those pale, penetrating eyes and ask, "Who do you belong to?" And Rowan would answer without hesitation, "You, sir. I'm yours." It stopped being a surrender and became an affirmation, a truth that settled into his bones and changed everything. But as the weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. Rowan noticed the way Cade watched him during the day, a softness creeping into that stern expression, the way his touches lingered, becoming less about control and more about affection, the way his voice gentled when Rowan was exhausted, praising not just obedience but his spirit, his determination, his growth. One night, after a particularly intense session left Rowan floating in that space beyond thought, Cade held him close and whispered, "You've become essential to me. I didn't expect that." Rowan's heart skipped. "Sir?" "Cade. When it's just us like this, call me Cade." He pressed a kiss to Rowan's temple. "I thought I wanted someone obedient, someone to mold. But you've given me so much more than that. You've given me your trust, your honesty, your whole self. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing this as just an arrangement." Rowan pulled back to look at him, hope and fear warring in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying when your 6 months are up, I'm not giving you back that deed." Cade's hand cupped his face. "I'm asking you to stay, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because this has become more than either of us planned." Tears pricked Rowan's eyes. "You mean it?" "I mean it. You're mine, Rowan Fletcher. But more than that, I'm yours. And I don't want that to end." The kiss was different this time. Not commanding or possessive, but tender. A promise sealed between equals who had chosen each other not out of desperation, but out of genuine want. When they finally broke apart, Rowan was smiling through his tears. "I'll stay, for as long as you want me. Forever then." Cade pulled him close again. "Because that's how long I plan to keep you." 6 months to the day after Rowan had first arrived, Cade handed him back the deed to his father's land. Rowan stared at it, confused. "It's yours," Cade said. "Free and clear. Your debt is paid." "But I thought, I know what I said. But you earned this. Not through servitude, but through everything you've given me. Your trust, your strength, yourself." He tucked a strand of hair behind Rowan's ear. "The land is yours, and if you choose to stay here with me, it'll be because you want to, not because you have to." Rowan looked at the deed, then at Cade, then back at the deed. His hands trembled as he held the paper that represented everything he'd once thought mattered. His father's legacy, his last connection to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. "I don't need this anymore," Rowan said slowly, the realization dawning as he spoke. "I thought saving this land would save me somehow, that keeping my father's dream alive would make me whole, but it wouldn't have. It would have just been another burden, another weight to carry alone." Cade watched him, silent, letting him work through it. "You taught me something these past 6 months," Rowan continued, his voice growing stronger. "You taught me that strength isn't about carrying everything by yourself. It's about knowing when to let go, when to trust someone else, when to stop fighting and start living. This land," he held up the deed, "this was my father's dream, not mine. Holding on to it would have been holding on to his ghost instead of building my own life." "So what do you want?" Cade asked quietly. Rowan looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had pushed him to his absolute limits and then pushed him further, who had demanded everything and given just as much in return, who had seen past the desperate, broken boy and helped forge him into someone stronger. "I want to build something new, with you. Not because I owe you, but because I choose you." Rowan held out the deed. "Sell it. Use the money to expand the ranch, to build something bigger, something we can run together." Cade's expression shifted, something warm and almost vulnerable flickering in those pale eyes. "You're sure? This is your last piece of your old life. Once it's gone, it's gone." "I know, and I'm ready to let it go." Rowan smiled. "I don't need that land anymore. I found what I was really looking for." "And what's that?" "A home, a purpose, someone who sees me and wants me anyway." Rowan stepped closer, tilting his head back to meet Cade's eyes. Someone who taught me that surrender isn't weakness, and that being someone's can actually set you free. Cade pulled him into a fierce embrace. You're sure? I'm sure. I'm yours, Cade, and I always will be. And I'm yours, Rowan, forever. They stood there on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert. Two men who had found in each other exactly what they'd been missing. The lonely rancher and the desperate drifter, transformed by trust and surrender into something stronger than either could have been alone. In the months and years that followed, their ranch became legendary, not just for the quality of the horses they broke, but for the partnership that ran it. People whispered about the giant cowboy and his devoted partner, about the way they moved in perfect synchronization, about the obvious bond between them. But Rowan and Cade didn't care about whispers. They had built something real, something lasting, a relationship forged in surrender and strengthened by trust, where power dynamics weren't about control but about care, where submission wasn't weakness but the ultimate expression of strength. Every night, Rowan still fell asleep in Cade's arms, and every morning he woke grateful for the storm that had brought him here, grateful for the courage to surrender, grateful for the man who had taught him what it really meant to belong. Some people spend their whole lives running from what they need, afraid to admit the truth of their desires. But Rowan had found the courage to stop running, to stand still and let someone see him completely. And in that vulnerability, he had found not weakness, but freedom. The desert wind still whispered through the canyon, but it no longer carried loneliness. Now it carried the sound of laughter, of two voices blending in easy conversation, of a life built on honesty and trust, and the simple truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say 3 words and mean them with your whole heart. I'm yours. And in the answering embrace, in the strength that surrounded him, Rowan knew he had finally found where he belonged. Not in the land his father had left him, but in the arms of a man who had taught him that surrender, real surrender to the right person, was the greatest gift he could give. And it was a gift that kept giving, day after day, night after night, for the rest of their lives. The end.